Hey folks, I'm Papa Boris, and in this video I'm going to show you how to play Daybreak. If you're unfamiliar, Daybreak is a really cool cooperative board game for 1, 2, 3, or 4 players that you can play physically or online through the very nice implementation on Board Game Arena, which is what I will be using to show you how to play. Also, big shout out to my friend Dan for teaching me how to play this game at his house. In this game, the players are trying to stave off climate change. Briefly, just let me explain the objective of the game. At the end of each round, each player will generate carbon. I'm teaching you this game with the solo mode, so I'm the only player. You generate 1 carbon for every one of these dirty energy tiles, and then also for every one of these emission tiles that have different icons, but functionally they're all kind of the same. They just all produce a carbon cube at the end of the round. This is what is called down here the carbon emissions. Then you remove a carbon cube for every tree and ocean on the world map. In this case, there are, at the beginning of the game, 6 trees and 4 oceans, so 10 carbon cubes would be removed or sequestered. The leftover carbon, called the net carbon, goes on the thermometer, which I'll talk more about later, but suffice it to say, bad things happen. If, however, you can manage to get it so that the number of trees and oceans is greater than the number of carbon cubes that you produce, then you've achieved what's called carbon drawdown, and barring a very unlikely corner case scenario, you win. So that's the objective. Now let's talk about how every round works. At the beginning of the round, you draw 2 global projects, and as a group, you have to unanimously agree which global project you're going to put into effect. Global projects may have certain requirements that need to be met, and then they produce a certain benefit. Obviously, right now I haven't explained anything about the game yet, so none of this is going to make any sense, but we'll just go ahead and pick one. And then once the project has been selected and everybody agrees, everybody draws a hand of 5 cards, and the game begins. Now, one of the cool things about this game is that it does play pretty quickly, because in the main phase, when everyone is playing, you all play simultaneously. So just simultaneously honor system, everybody just plays cards and does things kind of all at the same time. And then when everyone says, okay, I'm done doing stuff, that's when you proceed to the next phase of the round. Obviously, you can talk to people and coordinate things. If there's a certain action that you don't want to do until after someone else has done a certain thing, you can talk about it, or maybe something someone else does enables something that you do. Obviously, there's all of that you would normally have in a cooperative game, but to the extent that there's just certain things that you're doing, you can do them at the same time as everybody else. So what is it that you do during your round? Well, basically, you've got a hand of cards, and you can either play them, or you can tuck them, or you can pick one of your face-up cards and you can do the action that's shown on the card. So let's talk about how that works. Notice here it says your local projects. Every player begins with 5 cards face-up. Each of these cards represents a stack, and you can only have 5 face-up cards at a time. So if you wanted to play another card, you would need to play it on top of one of these 5, covering it up. Now in this video, I am not going to make necessarily optimal moves, so I'll just illustrate how this works. I might take this onshore wind cards and play it on top of clean electricity plants. So when I do this, clean electricity plants is covered up, and now onshore wind is here. When you play a card on top of another one, you lose the ability to play the action card of the card that was covered up. So I can no longer do the thing that clean electricity plants did. I can now do the onshore wind action. However, the tags of the card that was covered up are still shown. And as you'll learn when you play the game, tags are very important. For example, onshore wind requires an electricity tag. So if you don't have an electricity tag somewhere in the stack that onshore wind is a part of, you actually can't do the action. So that's what actions are. Actions are the text in the body of the card. You can see here, if you want to use onshore wind, you have to discard a card from your hand, and then arrow means you get 1 energy per wind tag on the stack. So since I have 2 wind icons in this stack, I would gain 2 clean energy from discarding a card to onshore wind. Some cards have other requirements. For example, this one has a limit. You don't need to have anything necessarily to do this, but you can only use it once per round per electricity icon in the stack that this is a part of. I'm not going to explain every single card effect, but you kind of get the general idea. There's something to the left of an arrow, that's like the cost you have to pay, and then something to the right of the arrow, which is the benefit that you get. Sometimes you'll see something like this, which means that you need to have a certain number of tags to do anything. Right now, I can't do anything with this because I only have one plug tag in the stack, and I need at least 2 to get an effect. But if I did have 2 plug tags, then I could use this action to draw a card, limit once per round. So, what are the general things that you want to accomplish with the actions? Let's talk about some of the other icons and their effects. So, beg your pardon. Over here is our energy requirements, also called in this game energy demand. This is how much energy you need to produce at the end of the round, or else bad things happen. Every energy that you're short, you get what's called a community in crisis. In the solo game, you actually start with one of these communities in crisis. Every time you get a community in crisis, you put it in one of these empty slots, and when you get your 4th one, it has to go in the 2nd row, and then you see this little -1 symbol. It means that at the beginning of the round, you only draw 4 cards instead of 5. If you get so many communities in crisis, you actually get all the way down to here, then you draw 2 fewer cards per round. And if you get so many communities in crisis that you actually fill up all these holes, then all the players instantly lose the game. So that is one of the loss conditions, is just getting too many communities in crisis. So you can tolerate a few, but it gets pretty bad if you get more of them. So it's a pretty good idea to meet your energy demand. At the beginning of the game, all players generate exactly enough energy to meet their demand. This little +2 at the end here means that at the end of the round, energy demand increases by 2. So the amount of energy that you need to produce increases as the game goes on. You'll see that I have 6 dirty energy and 3 clean energy. Dirty energy and clean energy both contribute to my energy output, which can satisfy my demand. The difference is that dirty energy produces carbon and clean energy doesn't. So over the course of the game, you might want to decrease your dirty energy because that reduces how much carbon you're producing. However, doing that also reduces your energy supply, so you better be making more clean energy to make up for it. The emissions down here produce carbon cubes, and they don't have any benefits the way that dirty energy does. They're just bad. The reason that there's different icons is that different cards will interact with these icons. So for example, clean cook stoves, once per round, lets you eliminate a carbon producer with this house symbol. I, in the solo game, have 2 of those. If I don't have any of them, then this doesn't do anything. So that's kind of the thing, is like a lot of the cards, most of the cards that reduce your carbon output only reduce a certain type. That's why these icons matter. Universal public transport over here can be used to reduce the car icon carbon emissions. Down here we have what are called resiliences. I haven't talked about them yet, but every round you activate some crisis cards. You can actually see one down here, but I'll talk more about them in a minute. Sometimes the negative effects of crisis cards can be reduced by your social resilience, your ecological resistance, and or your infrastructure resilience. So having resilience can reduce the magnitude of the bad things that happen to you over the course of the game. There are also crisis cards that make you lose resilience. If you are to lose a resilience but don't actually have any to lose, you get a community in crisis, which we've talked about. So having resilience can matter for 2 reasons. 1 is having enough to lose in case you need to lose some, and 2 is reducing the magnitude of the bad effects that might be happening to you. Now, here we see a thermometer. There is 1 square in each band per player. So it looks like a regular thermometer because I'm playing solo, but if I were playing in, let's say, a 3-player game, there would be 3 of these squares in each row. When an entire row fills up, you get a band. This is unavoidable. It's going to happen at least once in your game. And the presence of bands causes some crisis cards to get worse and worse. Each band also just makes things worse by itself, just by existing. I'm not going to talk too much about like the end of round stuff. That's kind of like a detail that the electronic version just takes care of you. But suffice it to say that you roll a die, and depending on which of these 6 icons shows up on the die, you advance these tracks. And every time you hit one of these spots, the tipping point, something bad happens that basically screws the players over or makes it harder for the players to win the game. So having more temperature bands means you roll more dice, which means more bad things happen, and also crisis cards hit harder the more of these that you've filled up. Each of these squares requires 5 carbon cubes to fill up. So right now, if I don't do anything, I'm going to fill up 2 of these squares. And in general, I'll just mention there are 4 different factions in the game. When you play solo, you play a kind of like conglomerate faction that's not any one of the 4. But each of the 4 factions, Europe, US, China, and Majority World, is engineered so that it produces 10 net carbon. Some of the factions have more carbon emissions than others, but the different factions also bring in a different number of forests and oceans to the game. So the factions that produce more carbon also bring in more forests and oceans, so that, again, all factions start the game with a net carbon of 10, meaning if no one does anything, you're going to fill up 2 temperature bands. But if you can remove even 1 carbon in your first round, you'll only produce 1 temperature band plus some extra spillover cubes, completing part of, but not the entirety of, the second band of the thermometer. So, last thing I should mention, I don't know if I've talked about this, but it's worth mentioning again if I did. You can put cards under a stack. So let's say I like this card. That lets me discard a card to remove 1 dirty energy per pink tag in the stack. I might say, I don't really care about this because I already have one of these cards in my starting deck, so let me just take this and tuck it under this one. So now I can do the dirty electric phase out, and it will get rid of 2 dirty energy rather than just 1. And I might say, okay, you know what? I don't really care about these cards, so let me just go ahead and, oopsie, hold on, it's actually moving. The other one, I gotta confirm it. So let me go ahead and discard a card to get 2 energy, and then discard another card to get 2 energy, and then I'll go ahead and discard this one to get rid of 2 dirty energy tokens. That's not a good play, but it's like a play that you can make. That's, an example of how you might make plays on your turn, and now you're out of cards, and you tell your other players, hey, I am done making moves. Now, you don't have to spend all your cards. There's no hand limit, so you can save cards from round to round, as many as you want, and you'll have them to work with at the beginning of the next round, in addition to the 5 cards that you drew. So let's briefly chat about crisis cards and global projects, and then we'll just kind of see what happens at the end of the turn, and that'll be it. I will do some playthroughs of this game, so if you want to see like how an actual whole game plays out, stay tuned. That'll be coming up in the next video. So we picked this global project that is activated if we can tuck 1 plug tag under it per player, which means in the solo game, just, 1 plug tag is enough. And then what it does is it makes it so that when a player does an action that removes some dirty energy, they can actually remove as much dirty energy as they want to. So you pay a card to activate it, and then potentially you could very efficiently get rid of all of your dirty energy. Crisis cards are bad. At the beginning of the game, you draw 3 of them, though this number does increase if you hit the 4th band of the thermometer. 1 of them is face up, so you can see what's coming, and also you can tuck things underneath it to mitigate or remove its effects. This causes each player to discard a card with a regulation tag. It can either be a face up one that is tucked, or one from their hand. But you can reduce the number of cards that have to be discarded by tucking a regulation tag underneath it. There are 2 crisis cards that are face down. These will get flipped at the end of the round, and they will happen, and bad things may or may not occur. But you cannot tuck cards underneath them, obviously, to mitigate them. You don't see any here, but there are effects in the game that let you turn face down crisis cards face up, which not only lets you see what's coming and possibly prepare for it, but also gives you the opportunity to tuck things underneath it to mitigate or negate its effects. Let's go ahead and end the turn, and we'll kind of see what happens next. So first, we generate the carbon. Then there's a really cool animation where it's sucked up by the forests and oceans, and the leftover carbon goes on top of the thermometer. After 5 cubes are added, we get a band, and the second band doesn't quite fill up. We roll a die. We got dieback of the Amazon, which does not do anything, because that wasn't a tipping point space. And that's it. That was it. We just rolled that one die because it's a solo game. In a bigger game, you would have rolled the die multiple times there. So I got lucky a little bit. You know, if I had rolled one of these two, then something bad would have happened. But next round, if I roll the die back of the Amazon again, then something bad will happen. All right, so now I have to discard a card with a regulation stack. Oh no, I'm not going to get to do this next round, or at least not as effectively, but we'll get rid of the face down one. And we got soil degradation. So the way that this works is that the player with the most communities in crisis loses an ecological resistance. So it's a solo game, I'm the only one, so I just lose ecological resistance. And then here we have the player with the lowest ecological resistance, again, that's me, removes one tree and adds 1 carbon to recent emissions per temperature band. Yikes. So we lose a forest, and we also get a carbon. It's just kind of like sit here, and it will add to the carbon for the next round. Then we draw 2 new global projects, and the game continues. If you cannot solve the climate crisis after 6 rounds, you lose. If you completely fill up this thermometer, you lose. And if any player fills up their communities in crisis with 12, you lose. However, if you can achieve carbon drawdown, meaning that the number of forests and oceans is greater than the number of carbon cubes that were emitted that round, then you finish to the end of the round, and as long as the crisis cards don't cause something bad to happen, like as long as the crisis cards don't, let's say, fill up someone's communities in crisis or fill up the thermometer, then you win. So 99.9% of the time, you know, tiny asterisk, if you can achieve carbon drawdown, then you win the game. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Please like and or subscribe. And if you'd like to stick around to see me play some solo Daybreak, stay tuned. That's what's coming up next.